Now is the time to lean in, to listen, and to act. Welcome to The Quiet Life. Welcome back to Season 3 of The Quiet Life. I am back as your host, Michael James Wong. And to kick off this season, I'm very excited to welcome here onto the show and onto the conversations Uju Asika, who is a mother, content creator, and author of the soon-to-be released book, Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. Hey Uju, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. It's so nice to have you on the show, and so nice to be able to share some time with you. And actually, for those of you guys who are listening at home, we're actually videoing these podcasts this season as well. And I'm looking into your living room, and I see you've got the whole family with you. So who's with you today?
Well, you can't hear them because they're not on mic, but I've got to my left is Ezra, who is 14, and he's the eldest, or my eldest anyway, and Jed, who is 11.
All right. I mean, what's really great about not only this podcast conversation, but actually just generally is to sit down and actually times that we have quieter at home and actually, welcome in conversations not only with you but with the whole family. So thank you for joining, and it's really exciting to be able to have this conversation today because we're going to spend a little bit of time expanding the conversation not only about race, but more importantly, what it means to raise kind kids and the importance of what that means, not only for ourselves as individuals, but in our family structures. But I thought before we get going, just so kind of our listeners can hear a little bit about you and kind of learn a little bit about your journey, um, I thought we'd start quite simply and quite easily. I mean, what was life like for you as a child? What were some of the fondest memories you have, and maybe you could share kind of your own upbringing a little bit.
Yeah, so my upbringing was very much what I call third culture kid upbringing. I was born in Nigeria in a town called Enugu. Then I came to the UK when I was really young. I went to boarding school in a um, very small boarding school in Sussex. It was very white. I was very, very African when I came, so it was like a real culture shock. I had my brother and my sister were there before me, and we were like maybe the three of out of only four black children in the school. So it was a very close knit school on one hand, but at the same time, we had a lot of difficult experiences just from being, the racial other.
Mm.
But aside from that, I spent a lot of time, we'd go back to Nigeria in the holidays and, have a massive, massive family with tons of cousins. So they would always come over every holidays and we'd all like sleep in the same bed, sometimes, on the ground and mattresses and like running around, and had a very sort of free range childhood in that sense. So yeah, I mean, on the whole, it was a really happy time,
Yeah, I mean, what I really love about hearing that, and obviously, like you and I have met over the past few weeks and have shared friends, but meeting for you the first time today and having this conversation already, I know how amazing this conversation will be because for me, very similar to this effect. I mean, my family is Chinese by origin. I was born in New Zealand. I grew up in let's call it upper middle class white Santa Monica, California, where the same way as I was always the Asian kid in class. I was always, you're always qualified by ethnicity. You're always qualified
mm,
with some sort of a label that has nothing to do a lot of times with your personality, but the way you look
yeah.
and the way you kind of stand out in a crowd. And so I feel like probably there's similarities in maybe kind of our upbringings, that kind of will be great to share today, which is really interesting. I mean, for you, being born in Nigeria and then growing up in, I guess, a white part of the UK and going through that kind of education system, what was it like early on in school for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was strange for me, when I first got to England. I remember things like not being able to eat the food. Everything tasted really weird. Like I'm used to very like spicy food and stuff like that I hate. And then obviously it was school food back in the 80s, which was just a disaster. Um, yeah, so but on the whole, I made lots of friends and I became very British. I was kind of like very British, but at the same
Right.
time very Nigerian. And it was a thing of like learning to straddle those two cultures. So when I was little, I think I spent a lot more time trying to assimilate, trying to sort of
Yeah.
belong, which I think is quite common for, when you're young, you just want to like fit
Mm.
in. And I'm always talking about, like in my book, I speak a lot about my my parents who were very much like born to stand out. They were very distinctive characters, and they would like roll up to school like, my mum would have like purple hair and
Yeah.
an African boo boo or something on, and I would just be like, oh my god, like, I want to disappear, and people would be like, oh my goodness, there's your parents. I'm like, oh no, you know um so there was, just that pressure of feeling like, oh, I don't belong. How many ways can I belong? What can I do to make myself more sort of acceptable to the people around me?
Mm.
And I think that's a pressure that's external, but it's also internal, because as a child, you're trying to find your place. Then when you get older, you realize that actually, the children around you probably wanted more from you. They wanted to see more about your heritage. They wanted to know a little bit more about your background. So yeah, it was interesting
Yeah.
to
I
say the
mean,
least.
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to hear that because, I mean, again, similarities for me as well. And I think, I mean, a lot of times when you're raised in I guess, a mixed cultural upbringing, I mean, would I be right to say that you were raised in a Nigerian or African household, even though you were
Yes.
in a British society and school system?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so that's very much who I am, when I think of myself. Actually, I think of myself as Nigerian. When people say, oh, where are you from? I'm Nigerian, but I'm also
Mm.
British. And for me, those two elements coexist quite happily. I know it's not the same for other people, and I know it's not the same for a lot of people when they look at me. They're like,
Sure.
oh, you must be one or the other, or you're
Mm.
not quite British enough. But for me, I definitely relate to the traditional or stereotypical British things, and at the same time, I'm very Nigerian and proudly so.
Yeah, and I think that's such a beautiful way to look at it, and maybe we find that place within it as we get older. I remember for me as a child, it was, I was never Chinese enough and never American enough and never New Zealand. So you kind of were never anything, so you never really had this belonging, but yet you had this yearning, or for me, I had this yearning of belonging, but never really
Yeah.
actually. And maybe it's an aspect of youth. I mean, did you have those experiences where you
Mm.
kind of wanted to belong, but you did, but there were moments where there was always something where you were not quite in.
Yeah, yeah, um, so many moments, and again, like this is I talk a lot about this in my book. For instance, things like I would have friends' parents who would say, "Oh, I couldn't tell that you were African if I spoke to you over the phone, but if I see you
Yeah.
in real life, clearly, you are African." And that's like a weird thing where you're like, is this a compliment? Is this an insult?
Yeah.
Like, I can't quite tell. Um, and, I think it is a process of growing up where you learn to understand that actually this is your strength. This is what makes me me, and this is what makes me unique on some level. And having that dual heritage for me is an advantage.
Oh, absolutely. And I think as well, I mean, reflecting back to childhood, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times, let's say children can be children at times, and you can have a lot of, I guess, niceties and also unpleasant moments. But I remember interactions or engagements as a child with, adults. And a lot of times, maybe for me, maybe it was an aspect of they were speaking negatively or in a racist capacity. There was just an element of unknowing, or I remember times
Mm.
I remember times specifically I went to a friend's house early on, and you can look and laugh at it now, but his parents said, "Hey, do you want chopsticks with dinner?" Just like simple things of like, I think,
Yeah.
and I look at it and go, I feel like they were just trying to be helpful, but then you get
Right.
slapped in the face with something that in many ways had nothing to do with me as a child other than someone else's
Mm.
perception. I mean, growing up, did you
Yes.
have any moments like that where there was kind of a sense of racism bestowed upon you, which in many ways was unwarranted or just ignorant?
Yeah, I mean, so many incidences like um, one thing that I wrote about was just remembering, a friend of mine who at school, and she came up to me and she like gave me this big hug, and she looked at me and then she just said, "I wish you were white." And then she ran off. And, I just remember standing there thinking, so many feelings like, what do I do with that? Where do I go with that? What do I say? There's no response. You're just sort
Yeah,
of left with that.
yeah.
You're left with the feeling, really, And same thing, I remember very clearly the first time a boy called me the N word.
Mm.
And again, it was really like, because I think I must have been, I guess, 8 or 9 at the time, and you know what it means, but you just don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Um, so, and at that time, I remember friends of mine, and at that time, I think one of my cousins had joined the school, and she kind of leapt to my defense as well. And it was, you know, I had sort of armor, but I didn't have anything from myself
Yeah.
to
Sure.
cover myself.
Yeah.
So yeah. Um, and I think,
And
when I
what
think
were
back on
the
it, he was very young himself. So I'm thinking to myself, well, why would he have said that? Did he even understand the impact? I'm sure he didn't really. It's just for him, it was a word. Children just get these little words and they find
yeah.
their little moments of power and they use them without thinking. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know, and I'm sorry that happened to you, and it's one of these things that especially as a child, and even as we grow up as adults, those are often moments that are so complex and complicated. Obviously,
Mm,
for us personally or individually, it's hurtful, it's frustrating, it's confusing. We're wondering why us, or what did I do to deserve that?
yes.
And then as we get older, maybe we can. Not understand, but maybe recognize that there was a lack of learning, a lack of education that they had growing
Mm,
up, a lack of awareness, or a lack of community that was supportive in a positive way. I mean, I think what's really interesting, especially the topic for what I really want to get into today, is this idea of not just, let's say, an upbringing of racism and how that affects us individually and personally, but you as a mother, and you as someone who's made this not only a big aspect of your family life, but a big aspect of your work, and kind of raising your hand to say, actually, let me help to support, to educate, to create conversation around this. I mean, what was the reason behind this? I mean, what was the journey to making this more than just how I do it in my household?
yeah, so in terms of the inspiration for the book, it was very much a relative of mine saying, "Oh, you should write a book on this topic because this is really your life. You're living it, and it's something that the world needs to know." And I was very resistant to actually stepping out and putting myself out there as somebody speaking overtly about sort of race and anti-racism and prejudice and all these issues because I didn't want to be pigeonholed, which often
Mm-hmm.
happens, especially as a black author, content creator. And B, I just thought, oh, it's such a huge topic, and I just want to be me. Like with my blog,
Mm.
it's been very much about having my children, taking them to various spaces, very much about taking up space as a Black multicultural family in London, unapologetically, without having to explain ourselves, without having to, advertise ourselves as a Black multicultural family, just being ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of what has drawn a lot of resonance with my audience. You know, people know me as the sort of go-to source for cool things to do with your family in London. Um,
Great.
so, but then thinking about it, thinking about my journey, and thinking about the things that are the experiences I've had with my own children, the conversations that we've had to have, even when I wasn't ready. I just thought, well, absolutely, this is something that needs to be shared, and I think that there was a space for a voice from someone like me who is a parent. So I'm not a race academic, I'm not a expert. You know, people will call me a parenting expert now because maybe I've written a book, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really into parenting experts. I don't think there's a parenting
Yeah.
expert role. I think that, you know, you become an expert to an extent on your own kids, but at the same time, it's always a learning process. So, um, you know, having all that information and experience, I thought, well, this is important to share because, you know, as we can see, it's more and more relevant um, today than ever
Oh,
before.
absolutely. And I actually really appreciate the way that you kind of gave us a little bit of that context around it because of this aspect of even when you're kind of talking about race and family that you didn't want to be pigeonholed, you didn't want to be categorized or labels because I think quite effectively as any racial minority, your whole life you're pigeonholed and labeled and doubled on top of that that you have mixed cultural background, mixed national background, like yourself. I mean, I have a New Zealand passport, an American passport, and a UK passport. And I have, oh, we both have these mixed kind of bags of identifiers, and then all of a sudden, if our work takes us into another place to be pigeonholed, sometimes we just want to be like, can you not just see me, right?
Mm, mm,
But
absolutely,
yeah, but
absolutely.
I appreciate it, and I think it's a beautiful thing that you're stepping into this space to hold it a lot of times for people who have questions, for people who want to have someone to look towards or look up to. I mean, in your own personal journey with your family and with your children, or what moments happened? You mentioned there was a few conversations that had to happen that you might not have been ready for. I mean, what happened in their lives and in your family life that made this an important topic that needed to be talked about?
Yeah, I think it's just the journey that you go through being a black mother, and then raising sons in an environment where, you know, for instance, living in London and the rate at which black boys are dying in London is kind of scary.
Mm,
And when your kids are really little, you're trying not to think about it because you're just A, you're trying to just keep them alive, and B, you're like, I just want to just move to the next. You know, all these little milestones are very important, and parenting is stressful anyway. But then, you know, you have these weird encounters. You know, there was, I don't know if I spoke about it when we were speaking on Just Breathe on Instagram, but I spoke about the an incident in a shop where this man basically, you know, it was a weird racist incident, but it wasn't overt. Like he didn't say anything specifically, but the boys were really little, and Jed had bounced a ball on his foot or something accidentally in the
right.
shop, and the man shouted at him. So I had gone over to say, oh, you know, I'm really sorry that my child. He must have been about 3. I'm really sorry that that happened, but you know, he's really little. You know, maybe shouting was not the way.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the man said something to me like, well, you know, if you people knew how to look after your children, wouldn't have any issue. And then he stormed out of the shop. And I remember Ezra, you know, he was probably about 7 at the time, and he shouted after him. He was like, "Don't talk to my mummy like that." And then he burst into tears. And so I had this moment of just like comforting Ezra and comforting Jed, and then, you know,
Mm,
just telling them, oh, don't worry, it's a silly man and all that. But recently, you know, when we spoke about it, Ezra, when I was talking about writing a book on race, Ezra said to me, oh, you know, was it like that time? And he
right.
referenced this memory, which, you know, actually, yeah, surprised me because I thought, oh, I didn't realize he had taken that on board, that that was a racial thing. You know, he felt it even though he was really
Yeah.
young, and it wasn't like I didn't sit with him and give him a long speech about racism at the time,
Yeah.
but it's something that he felt. And very often these conversations just come up, or we're watching something, or you're reading a book, and something happens, and they ask you these questions. And I think most of the time, I would say I'm never ready. I'm never ready for the answers, but I do my best. And we've always had a very open relationship, with them being able to ask me anything, even if it's really awkward. So
Sure.
yeah.
That's a powerful story, and I think it's really, really insightful that, someone of his age to remember, something that happened when
Mm,
he was 7 or 6, and it maybe goes to show that actually how important it is that we're aware as adults and as parents about the impact that we have on children, the next generation,
yes,
on how much impact there is in all of society around race and culture. I mean,
absolutely.
for you personally, did you have any early memories like that, or did you remember anything that kind of stands out even to this day, or something that made it into the book of like, this was quite a big moment of racism in my life?
Um, Gosh, so many. I think just walking down the street and having,
Yeah.
someone drive past and shout the N word at me, when you're really young, like I don't know, I must have been about 12, and I'm just strolling to the shops. And yeah, it's always that thing where you feel disempowered really
Mm.
suddenly, and it completely changes your day, because one minute you're just yourself, you're in your own world singing a song strolling down the street, and next
Yeah.
minute it's like, oh, okay, I am a minority, and I am not wanted. That's kind of the feeling. So yeah, and it's what I find saddening is that I spoke to quite a lot of mothers for this book, and a lot of Black mothers, and I spoke to family members. Some of their stories are in the book, some didn't quite
Right.
make it into the book. But what I found really strange and saddening is how many stories we've all just buried, like we've just kind of brushed brushed off, or we've minimized because we just had to carry on. There's so many like really painful incidents. There were times people shared stuff with me and I was in tears, and they were tearful, getting tearful as they were talking about it. But then this is something that they just kind of brushed off and carried on with life. And I'm like,
Mm.
ah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's painful.
it is a painful and tough conversation. Sharing them hopefully is helpful to maybe have that, to see that support. For people listening, and obviously we have a lot of listeners who come from all different diversity and background, but if I could ask you quite specifically, with children growing up Black in the UK, what types of things do you think that they have to consider that other that white kids don't have to consider?
Mm. Gosh, I think the fact that because racism is so systemic and so pervasive, but at the same time, in the UK in particular, it's mostly under the surface. So there's a lot of it that you wouldn't see or be able to sort of point at. But just even the fact that, um, the maternal mortality rate for Black mothers is so much higher than
Right.
for white mums. So right out the gate, before your child is born, they're already at risk. Then before they enter the school system, you've got to counter the fact that even getting into certain schools, even depending on where you live, and even depending on, what kind of school it is, whether your child will be able to get into that school, then once they're in the schooling system, that is typically where most children have their first experience of racism, whether as a victim or as a bystander, or as as the person, being the aggressor, consciously or unconsciously. So for a Black parent, you have to worry about, okay, how will I get my child into school? into the right school, into a school that will protect their interests. Then you
Yeah.
worry about, how they're going to, navigate racism as they go through school, because it just feels inevitable. I didn't speak to any
Yeah.
mothers who hadn't had an experience. And then, like I said, for instance, living in London, I think about the rate at which, knife crime and gun violence is happening. And the way it's treated by the government for me is very much like a us versus them
Right.
situation, rather than I was listening to a talk on, I think it was Newsnight or so, and they were talking about gun violence and knife crime should be seen as a public health issue, and once it's a public health issue, you take it away from this sort of very
Yeah.
accusatory, oh, these children are doing the wrong thing, to, okay, these children need help, these families need help, these communities need help, this affects everybody, it's a universal problem. So, yeah, I think even just making it to 18, as a black child in this world, you're
Yeah.
going to navigate so many. I don't know if I can call them bumps, but
Yeah.
challenges for sure,
Challenges and
and
experiences.
challenges and experiences. And as a parent, you have to engage as early as possible, much sooner than you're ready for, really.
Yeah. I mean, and with that, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, arguably for children growing up, the most moments of these kind of, racist or challenging experiences are likely to happen at school, right? Outside of the
Yes.
home life, and where you're with them, or they're not really going to be kind of, those are the places where they're in many ways unsupervised to be in the full front line of any conversation. I mean, with your
Mm.
kids, have there been specific moments where at school they've come home and told you a story, or anything that's kind of been a personal kind of family conversation around race?
Yeah, I mean, they had their sort of their first kind of racial incident when they were playing football outside school, and I was not with them. And they came home, and I think Jed was, how old he was? I think he was in year two at the time, so he would have been about 6.
Okay, so real young.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
so they both came home. They were very upset. Jed was in tears, and they'd had an incident with a boy who had um, told them they had fat lips, and was quite aggressive towards them. So, but they didn't really understand the racial connotations
Yeah.
of being told that they had fat lips. But what had happened was that another mum who had been, there at the time had witnessed it. So she also reported it to me later, and she then reported it to the head teacher. And yeah, it caused a bit of friction, shall I say, with the boys' parents. We had a meeting at the school. The head teacher dealt with it fantastically, to be honest. She had an open meeting with me and my husband and the boy's mum. The boy's mum was She was not very happy with being told that her son was a racist, which was never anything that I had said. I wouldn't call a child a racist. I don't think that that's
Mm.
what's happening. I think children are picking up things,
Yeah.
and they're sharing them the way they do. But anyway, she was very much like, my son doesn't have any racism in him, um, and fortunately, the head teacher had said to her, well, actually, it wasn't me that had reported this as a racist incident. It was another mum who happened to be a white mum. And anyway, so we had this meeting, and then I'm not sure that in terms of the mum and her child, I don't know that what she really learned from the experience, because she just kind of
Right.
left quite angry.
Yeah.
But it was an opportunity for the head teacher to, I think they had some workshops in the school
Oh, wow,
around,
great.
race and diversity and bullying as well. And, so it was dealt with to my satisfaction at the school. But yeah, it was difficult
Yeah.
because I think, when it's your child and then when you've experienced something like that yourself, you just kind of like your head kind of explodes, and you're thinking of it. They're in a very diverse school. It's very multicultural. It's very local. It's just down the road from us, and I just felt that they were in a safe space, to be honest. So yeah, it was a bit of a slap to the face, kind of a shock to the
Yeah.
system.
And
But
it is
fortunately,
really,
they haven't
yeah.
had too many of, they haven't had many, again,
Yeah.
they've had quite a straightforward
Yeah.
journey through school. Mm.
I mean, and I mean, it is challenging in all aspects. I mean, children are sponges, right? And they mimic their
Yes.
social surroundings. They mimic, things that they hear on TV. They mimic, their older sibling, their sports friends, all these kind of things that
Yeah.
we children, and we all pick up from what can sometimes be socially normalized or just brushed aside. And
Mm.
I've heard lots of stories, where people, a lot of times parents will, I'd say this with hopefully the biggest heart of looking at the conversations. I don't think any parents want their children to be racist. They don't raise their children to be
Exactly.
racist, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that children don't pick up things that are around them. They don't they don't absorb, let's call it, everyday pleasantries which have a negative or a racial skew to them. And a lot of times I see and notice that we can see parents who miss a moment to educate by just saying, "Oh, don't talk about that," or "You shouldn't say that." They acknowledge they acknowledge the need to not talk about it, but maybe don't take the opportunity to talk about it. I mean, and I think, and again, in this conversation of parenting and race and with children, if I was to ask you maybe the other side of the coin, and for listeners who are maybe white parents, people who are of a certain privilege, who might definitely appreciate and or sympathize with the stories, they have no personal connection to it because it's just by nature, their skin color, their conversation, their privilege, whatever it is. What is your I guess conversation for those parents? Where and how do we create opportunities for conversations around race without almost making it a conversation in the first place?
Right. Well, I would say, A, be proactive, because as you're saying, children are picking up all these racial ideas and experiences, by osmosis almost, and it starts really young. Like, babies can recognize ethnic differences, and children, like by age 2, already starting to, have this experience of me versus you, and sort themselves into little groups. And I think as parents, you just have to really intervene and be proactive. And it doesn't always have to be heavy handed. Like, at the moment, there's lots of reading lists going around the internet, and I have a watch list on my blog. I have, a whole list of movies that you
Right.
can watch, because I find that, like, stories really the best way to teach children. I think children learn best by, well, anybody really learn by storytelling, and also by actions, by the way you behave, by the way you interact with people. So one element is, bringing them into a story, um, you know, starting with a book. There's lots and lots of books out there that can help you start a conversation on race and equality and diversity. There's lots of films and TV shows. There's tons that we watch as well, and that, sometimes the kids will just ask a question based off something we watched, and then that sparks a conversation. But sometimes just asking a question, a very simple
Mm.
question to your child, like, about what they've noticed or who they play with, or You know, who are the children in their class? Does anybody strike them as different? If so, why? Always taking a very curious approach, and
Yeah.
being ready as well for the awkwardness of it, being ready for any discomfort that comes up. You know, don't just
Mm,
squash your discomfort and then squash the conversation, even if it's awkward, even if you say the wrong thing, even if your child says something that shocks you. You know, use this opportunity as, you know, time to engage further and go
yeah.
just a little bit deeper. And obviously, it depends on the age of your child. You know, the conversations will change as they grow. But if you start as young as possible, then it becomes easier. It doesn't become, like I said, I still have, you know, my eldest is 14, and he'll say something to me, and I'm like, and then I have to like take a breath and
Yeah.
be like, okay, where did you learn this from? You know, and these are the
Come
things
sit
that I'm
here.
just like, yeah. I'll be like, okay. Um, yeah, but you know, my first thing will be like, okay, why do you think that? You know, where did you learn this from? Then you give him an opportunity to explain himself, and then you
Yeah,
can
that's
have a
powerful.
conversation, you know, rather
Mm,
than just sort of going, no, no, don't say that, don't do that, don't, you know, which I have done myself in the past when they were little. I'm like, oh no, don't say that, oh shh, you know, but it's just out of panic, like as a parent, especially if you're in public and they say something or do something, you're like, oh no, you know, shh, like, my niece was reminding me of, I think when we were on the bus, and she said when Ezra was really young, and I think he just said, "Oh, Mum, look, that family all have really big noses," really loudly on the bus, and you're just like, you know, shh. So I think the thing to say then is just like, you know, well, that's an interesting observation. Let's not talk very loudly about about people. And you know, in private, you can say to them, listen, don't make comments about people's features and that kind of stuff, because it can be hurtful. Obviously, you know, no one wants to be sitting on a bus and have some child pointing out
yeah. Yeah,
their big
absolutely.
nose.
Yeah, I mean, and I definitely relate to that. I mean, whether it is this aspect of, let's say kids say the most interesting things, even as an adult, having a child, being on a bus or an event and someone goes, ooh, and they kind of acknowledge an ethnic or cultural feature, and they go, "Ooh,"
Yeah,
it still hurts, right? It still hurts even as an
yeah,
adult. But
yeah.
I think it's really powerful what you're saying is taking a proactive approach, taking
Mm,
a proactive conversation and not waiting until it's kind of just surprises you or when you're ready or
yes.
when you're comfortable. Arguably any conversation that we have in life that is challenging will at some point be awkward. It's not going to be like,
Mm,
thanks for this very challenging conversation, that was lovely. There are elements that we can grow and learn through the challenge and through the awkwardness, and I think it's so it's so powerful that it is a proactive conversation that as parents that you can have with children. Hi, guys. Welcome to the T2 Tea Break, which is our moment to stop and enjoy a cup during the episode. Now, I'm joined by Nikki, our show producer and resident tea lover, to talk about Just Peppermint. And I love this tea. I've been drinking it all week, every morning when I wake up. So I thought I'd ask you, Nikki, can you tell us a bit more about Just Peppermint?
Yeah, well, it's a peppermint tea, as the name suggests. It's particularly good, this one from T2, because the tea is just made with leaves, which is actually quite unusual for a peppermint tea. Normally they have flavourings and other things like that in, but this is just the leaves. And all the leaves are grown in the Pacific Northwest of America, which is the reason why they're grown there is because there is a particular strong menthol taste in that tea.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And is there a best way to brew this one?
So it's pretty straightforward. Just boiling hot water straight out the kettle, and 1 to 2 minutes, and that's all you need, nothing else. And it's perfect any time of day. It's got no caffeine. I particularly like it after a big meal. It's just nice and refreshing and kind of makes you feel a bit more awake. It's kind of like brushing your teeth without really doing it.
Nice. All right, guys. Well, I'm enjoying the tea. If you guys want to enjoy it at your homes, you can find out more and check out the whole collection at t2t.com. And we'll put that link in the show notes for you to check out. And if you've been enjoying the tea with us, sip slowly and enjoy the brew. If not, maybe just sit back, close your eyes, and just breathe. But I mean, for parents who are listening, who might say, okay, well, I live in a community that is predominantly or completely white or European. I don't have diversity around me. I don't have access to that. What types of opportunities are there for education or for growth and learning in those situations?
Yeah, I think again, really sort of doing your research. If you live in a community that's just very, very much everybody looks the same. We live in a world where we have access to the world just via the internet. So there's so many websites. Again, there's so many books. There's so many movies. Once you immerse yourself in a story, you can take yourself anywhere, really. You don't have to feel. I think the power of stories is that they transport us to different lands. When I was a little girl in Enugu before I came to England, I had so many experiences, shall I say, that I felt that I was, that I understood just from reading books. I read all these books by Enid Blyton, who I speak about in my book because turns out she was quite racist. So that's another thing. But I loved her books. I loved her stories. I read all of the Famous Five and all this kind of thing. And I couldn't wait to have ginger beer and lashings of ginger beer. She was always writing that, and I was so obsessed with it. But this was me in Enugu. I didn't have anything like that around me, but I was able to engage with it just from one book. So I think as parents, definitely bring in more books, bring in more multicultural books into your house, bring in more films, reach out. If you can, travel. Obviously, I think travel is one of the best forms of education. And, even if you can't travel overseas, even within the UK, even within just going to the next postcode, you might find a neighborhood that's more diverse, where you can just explore and just get to know people, or get to know the locals, or get to know the food, just be curious, be adventurous.
Yeah, I mean that's such. I really agree with that, and I think our community or geography shouldn't limit our ability to have access to knowledge, inspiration, education, all of those things. And I think those are some great places that people can really look into. One thing that I wanted to ask you, and this is something that is challenging me, likely challenging for a lot of people. Say you're a parent, and oftentimes we've put a lot of focus on the next generation, and we put a lot of focus on our children, but oftentimes our equal generation, but actually even more the older generation, aunts, uncles, grandparents, times were different back then, right? And so things that were appropriate 20 years ago, 50 years ago, aren't appropriate now, but yet a lot of those conversations can come through inside the household, or can come through at a family get together. I remember, and I can look at it from both sides of the coin. I have aunts and uncles who, you'll go to a family dinner and you'll go, did they just say that? Or you'll be in a social setting, and one of my friends' grandpa or aunt and uncle were there, and just very casually they'll throw something out that right now you're like, that's quite a lot. It's quite a racially motivated thread of a comment, but to them it's appropriate, or it was appropriate. How do you open those conversations? How do you deal with that? Especially because a lot of times it is family or close friends. It's not just the random guy down the road.
Well, my approach to it, and I think it has to very much be a personal thing, according to who you are and how you interact with people, and where your values lie, because I know some people who are very much about blocking everyone. I know people who have, like, since, let's say, since Brexit, they've, like, lost
Mm.
half of their Facebook friends and their family. They've blocked everyone. They've cut everyone off, because if you don't agree with my viewpoint, or if you're saying something that I find negative or racist or bigoted, I've blocked you, and that's it. So, that's one way of doing it. That's not my way of doing it. For me, I feel like you have to sort of separate the person from what it is that they've learned and what it is that they could possibly unlearn. People of a certain generation, obviously, they've come up with their whole
Mm.
value system, and it's difficult to just say to someone, oh, don't do that, because they'll be like, well, why? Like, that's how I've always done it. I think it's important to intervene. Like, if somebody says something bigoted, I think it's important for you to say, hey, that's not okay. That's racist. That's bigoted. That's transphobic. Whatever it is,
Mm.
they said, I think it's really, really sort of essential to speak up at those moments. Um, I think it's not always a case of um, an adversarial. Sometimes you can do it with some humor. I find that when I'm speaking with aunties and uncles, I have, like, some um, aunties and uncles who are very, very, very religious. And, if you mention, for instance, anything about homosexuality, that
Hmm.
becomes like a massive, like,
Yeah,
sticking
yeah.
point. And, I'm like, they're my family members. I'm not going to cut them out of my family, but at the same time, I'm going to be, very vocal about the fact that, hey, you can't say this stuff. This
Yeah.
is not okay. I don't believe in it. And especially if my children are there, because I think for me, the most important thing is sort of breaking that breaking that
Great.
chain of
Yeah.
ignorance. So, if it's like my, a grandparent or somebody who is stuck in a particular mindset, um, I think you can challenge them, but they might not necessarily move past. But you can challenge them very, very vocally if your children are there, so that you can just break that chain of ignorance and be
Mm.
like, this is not okay. You cannot pass this on to my child. Whatever you think, if you want to hang on to those beliefs, that's up to you. But it's not going
Yeah.
any further than this.
Yeah, I mean, I really love that. I mean, this idea, or your idea of breaking the chain of ignorance, is such a powerful insight, because we can't change everyone. We can't arguably change the world that used to be, but we can
Mm,
make choices for how we take it forward. I mean, and
absolutely.
I think that's really powerful way for us to look at not only what's happening now, but for the next generation. I mean, so talk to me about your book now. Now, obviously, your book, it's very much about bringing up race, which obviously the name itself is talking about how we support our children. But who's it actually for? Is it for the black parent, the white parent? Is it for the children to read? I mean, what is the actual narrative focused around?
The book is this is a book for everyone, really. I say that I wrote this book for my community, and so my community includes um, people like me, people who are black, raising children, in a white world, people who are parents of color, raising children in a multicultural society, but also just parents who are trying to raise decent, responsible, kind, caring children. So in that sense, it's really it's aimed at everybody. It's aimed at parents, but even if you're not a parent, if you have a child in your life, or if you've been a child, I think you'll find some resonance, but just because of some of the stories that are shared, from myself and from the other mothers, talking about their childhood experiences, and how racism impacted
Mm.
them, and how they've chosen to do differently with their own children. One mum spoke to me about this pressure that I think every child of color growing up in the white world has been told, oh, you have to be 10 times as excellent if you want to make
Yeah,
it. Really, like, you
yeah,
can't just do it this way. You've got to be like,
yeah,
and it's almost a joke, and certainly in the Black community, I'm sure with you as well. Um, but what she's done is she has not taught that to her own children. She's just like, I've just taught them to just be themselves and to be happy as themselves. And I thought that was really powerful because I feel like I'm still carrying a little bit of that with my own children. I still feel like, oh, you have to make sure you excel. I mean, I'm not one of those high pressure mums, but I do think I still feel a little bit of that baggage really of,
yeah, yeah.
be
You
excellent, be
be excellent, be
be
extra, be
amazing,
twice as
be
yeah, yeah,
extra. Yeah, yeah, which is a lot. It's a heavy burden, especially for a child. So yeah, I thought that was
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I think what it really goes to show, and maybe if I was to make a little bit of kind of a perspective on just the way I see your book. I mean, what I really love about not only the title but the talk about what's inside the book and this whole topic. A lot of times there's a huge conversation about racism. That's not a new thing. It's not a thing that unfortunately is going away anytime soon. And we always talk about racism and the idea that it's not enough just to be not racist, that we need to be proactively anti-racist. But I think what I love about the conversation with you is actually you take it one step further, which is actually the opposite of racism is kindness, right?
Mm,
Unconditional love. This sense of it's not one thing just to reflect the negativity of racism, but actually, can we go so much further with our children, so much further with our conversations to be proactively kind,
mm,
proactively loving without a need to identify? And I thought that was really unique and distinct way to look at racism. And I wanted to ask you, for you and with your children as well, how how you see kindness come to life. I mean, what is it? Are there things that you guys say around the house or posters on in the kitchen, like that push and lead kindness as opposed to let's just always talk about racism?
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think well, I would love if my kids would pay any attention to posters around the house. That would be brilliant. Unfortunately, unfortunately they don't. But we definitely, especially when they were younger, we would have this thing where, um, it was called one kind thing, and it was just,
Right.
do one kind thing for each other every day, and then to extend that to do one kind thing for somebody outside the family. And a lot of the times this was just like my peace tactic because they'd be like breaking each other's heads and I'm like
Sure, sure.
shouting one kind thing, please, one kind thing. But the thing is, like, no matter what had happened, no matter who was shouting, screaming, crying, at the end of the day, we would take the time to be like, um, you know, this is the one kind thing that I did for somebody else. These are three kind words that I can say about Ezra. These are three kind words I can say about Jed. And I have some really cute things that I've written down from when they were very little.
Oh yeah, can you remember
I
any
wish
of
I
them
had. I
now?
wish I wish I had a quote. This is not a direct quote, but this is one from Ezra. Ezra said something like Ezra said, Jed is a very kind brother. He has kindness in his heart. Even if you almost break his head, he will still forgive you. Something like that. So basically, you
Oh,
can tell
yeah,
it's
yeah,
from,
yeah.
even if I nearly kill him, he will find a way to forgive me because he is kind. Which is true, actually. He is, he's a kind soul. And, so we sort of, we look at, and one of the reasons that I chose kindness as the subtitle. Originally, when I pitched the book, it was How to Raise a Happy Child in a Prejudiced World, because again, happiness is a massive value for us and our family. And I think there's a poet, Toy Dericote, who talks about joy as an act of resistance, which is something that I think is really powerful, like, the whole hashtag Black Boy Joy, and just
Mm.
living your joy, especially when things are really heavy or when the world feels really oppressive. It's like, how do you maintain happiness? So happiness was a real factor, but I changed it because I wanted something more active. I wanted to really focus on kindness. Like happiness is very much like your experience, but
Yeah.
kindness, like you said, takes it that step further. It's about what can you do to make things better. And I think that's something that, if every child if every parent taught their child, kindness as a value and kindness as an action, as a way of doing as well as a way of being, I think it would be transformative because there isn't space for all the other crap when you're just thinking kindness, when you're just being kind.
Yeah, and it's so true, and it's so powerful how even at the most fundamental level, that embodying this happiness and joy, but putting it to work, putting it to action,
Mm,
right? Taking anything that can be perceived as a positive action and putting kindness as the motivator is a really powerful
mm,
thing for not children but for adults. And I think in this conversation of race, in this conversation of raising children, in this conversation of just the world we live in today, leading with
mm,
kindness and actioning kindness is a really powerful quality that we can take
mm.
as a beautiful learning from this. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's a
Thank-
really no, I mean it's been really great having this conversation, and I've learned so much, and I think it's a great way to continue expanding these conversations. I think more than ever, the conversation of race is important. It's massive. It's huge. I
mm,
think what's important now, and this is maybe just from my point of view, is to start having specific narratives within that wider conversation so we can actually
mm,
have actionable learnings, actionable steps forward. And I think there's a lot of people doing great work about moving the whole conversation forward. But what I love about speaking to you is that, yes, we can speak about the wider context of it, but you're also looking at it from one actionable angle. How can we support it as parents? How can we support it with our children? How can we have proactive narratives and ways forward, which I know for me, and I know for probably a lot of people listening, there's been a lot of great insights taken from this, and a lot of great messages and actions that can be implemented straight away. So thank you so much for sharing, Uju.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, it's been a great conversation, and I'm so grateful that we can have this time together, not only with yourself, Uju, but with a lot of people coming up on this season to talk about topics that matter, and to be inspired by people like yourself who are actually doing the work. I know at the beginning, at the top of the show, you said you're not an expert in this work, but the reality is, we're all making it up as we go, doing our best to be supportive and to be kind and to be positive, because I believe that we're all doing our best to make a brighter future for the next generation. And especially as a parent, like yourself, and as an adult like myself, there is so much of a moment right now to break that chain of ignorance. So thank you so much for sharing that and being a part of this conversation with us.
Thanks so much. I mean, I think it's brilliant that you're having these conversations. Conversation is really sort of is a key theme and a strand running through my book as well, because that's where it starts, isn't it? People talk about obviously action is essential,
Mm,
taking action is essential, but you've got to start with just having these conversations. And so many of us didn't have them, with our parents. So many of us haven't had them with our peers. We've been afraid to have them. And what you find is there's just a simple conversation really can change somebody's life. I mean, it's
yeah,
just it's
absolutely.
amazing to think so, but it really can, just one conversation. So yeah, I think it's great that you're doing
Yeah.
this.
And it's such a
Thank you.
powerful thing, and you're absolutely right that in most cases that conversation creates connection, right? It creates a more powerful way that we can see and acknowledge how everyone sees the world in different ways. And the more that we can come together through conversations, the more we are connected as individuals, the better we are together as community, humanity, humans, whatever we want to look at it, that there is a way of bringing us together in a way that we can all move forward in a beautiful way. So thank you so much for being on the podcast this week. It's such a joy and a pleasure to spend some time with you. I thought before we wind it up, what I would love to ask you is when's the book coming out, and where are the best places people can find you and stay connected?
So the book is coming out on September 3rd, which is a Thursday, which is also a back to school day. It's all happening. September 3rd, you can find it on, you can currently pre-order it on Amazon and Waterstones, and then it will be out, wherever books are available on September 3rd. And you can find me at Babes About Town, pretty much everywhere, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and my blog is babesabouttown.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, and I'm so looking forward to grabbing a copy of the book. Guys, remember, it is Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. We'll make sure we put the link to the book in the show notes so you guys can find it, and all of Uju's handles so you guys know where to connect with her. Once again, thank you so much for being on the podcast this week. It was an absolutely insightful conversation for me, and something that I'm going to take forward into all of the conversations that we have on this season.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, as you know, we're back with season 3. Stay connected. If you enjoy these conversations and are looking forward to more, please stay connected. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple. As always, you can follow me at Michael James Wong on Instagram, as well as stay connected with the whole Just Breathe community at Just Breathe, and check out a lot more conversations like this on justbreatheproject.com. And thanks for joining. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you guys next time on The Quiet Life.